Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. It's a little after 3, and I know we may still have some people coming in late. If I don't use the microphone, can everyone in the back hear me? Okay, great. I might move around some. But my name is Sarah Beasley. I'm the Director of Retention here at Concord, and really became interested in this topic about Appalachian stereotypes and how it might affect students. Several years ago, I was working on my dissertation actually in southern West Virginia. I did a case study in Mingo County. Is anyone from Mingo County? No? I know we have some Wyoming County and some probably surrounding counties, but anyway, I was doing my dissertation research on the college access and success of rural first-generation students from Mingo County. And when I was talking with students from the county, one of the questions I asked was, well, talk a little bit about the stereotypes of southern West Virginia, of Appalachian, positive or negative. And all I heard were negative stereotypes. And I'm sure you can guess what those were. Anyone want to yell out what you think I heard?
Hillbilly.
Hillbilly, yes.
Barefoot and pregnant.
Barefoot and pregnant, yep. Uneducated, ignorant, others. So, yep, that's exactly what I heard time and time again from students. And I think these stereotypes, we also hear a lot. They're reinforced in, unfortunately, the national media, in news, TV shows. And I was talking earlier about how, you know, making fun of Appalachians is one of the last groups that it's still politically correct, it seems like, to make fun of for these kinds of negative stereotypes. And if you have a comment or question, please feel free to just ask while I'm talking. I think it would be great to hear your questions while we're going. So when I started thinking about these negative stereotypes, I was a psychology major in college, and it got me thinking back to a concept in psychology called stereotype threat. And stereotype threat is basically when an individual who's part of a negative stereotype group finds themselves in a situation where they feel like they can confirm the stereotype. And this research came out of Stanford in the mid-90s. And one of the first studies that was done on stereotype threat, Steele and Aronson looked at African American students at Stanford, and they gave white and African American students, it was, I think, part of a GRE test. And they found that when African Americans were made to think about their race, they did a lot more poorly on the test than when they weren't primed to think about their race because of the stereotypes wrapped around African American intelligence. Whether they really truly believed it or not, it can really lead to anxiety of a stereotyped person. And that increased anxiety can lead to problems with your memory function. It can lead to increased negative thoughts, those kinds of things. And there's been a lot of studies now since the 90s confirming this idea of stereotype threat. Everything from women in math and science. So when women are made to think about their gender, they do more poorly on math tests than when they don't. And they do just as well as men when they're told that women are equal to men in math ability. So there's lots of examples of stereotype threat in research. And it can also work to It can also, on the flip side, if there's a positive stereotype about a group, it can help enhance that individual's performance. For example, one study looked at Asian women and math. And when the Asian women were made to think about being a woman, they did more poorly on the math test than when they were made to think about being Asian because of the stereotype that, oh, Asians are good at math. So it's really interesting work. So there are a lot of other effects of stereotype threats. So I talked about the underachievement on academic tasks, and that's where a lot of the research began with stereotype threat. But it also can lead to things like students self-handicapping, which basically means they might do things like reduce practice time or studying for a test because they just discount. For example, they might discount maths saying, this really isn't important in the real world. Why does it matter? I'm never going to use this. The test isn't fair. Things like that. It also can limit students' options and alter their aspirations. Again, women, for example, may not major in a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, or math, because they think they're less capable. Interesting, it can also non-academic tasks. So there have also been studies on, I think we've probably all heard the stereotype, white men can't jump. Well, they've done research that when they've tested European American men in a physical task, and when they talk about that kind of stereotype, they do less well physically on the task than they do when they're told, oh, this is just to assess some other, not a physical task, but your ability to learn a new task, something like that. So it's interesting how it can play out in a lot of different domains. It also can cause individuals to really distance themselves from the whatever the threatening domain is. For example, academics. So for example, low socioeconomic, low-income students might begin to say, well, school isn't that important to me anymore, so I'm going to back off that some. Stereotype threat can be made worse when a person is more likely to identify with the stereotyped group. So when people ask me who I am or about myself, one of the first things I say is, I'm a West Virginian. And I am proud of it, but I really identify as being a West Virginia, so that the stereotypes of West Virginia might affect me than someone who might not identify as much with being a West Virginian, for example. It can also be made worse if an individual feels like they're a minority or one of the only people from that stereotyped group. So, for example, maybe underrepresented minorities on campus here who may feel like they're a very small number may be more affected by certain stereotype threats about maybe their race or ethnicity. Also, if the stereotype is made more salient or prevalent, like, for example, in standardized testing, oftentimes they'll ask at the beginning of the test your gender, your race. Some researchers say that should be asked at the end of the test, so folks aren't thinking about, well, I'm a female and I'm taking a math test, I'm not going to do as well on this. The impact of stereotype threat really got me thinking that this could have a real impact on student self-confidence. And this is important because a lot of the retention research shows that there are these non-cognitive or predictors that are better predictors of student success than things like intelligence tests like the ACT or SAT or IQ tests. And one of the best predictors of student success is academic self-efficacy, which is basically a student's academic self-confidence. And a lot of studies reveal that rural students, low-income students, first-generation students, and I know many students at Concord fit one of those three categories, if not all three, are less likely to have high academic self-confidence. So that can really make a difference in the success of students on campus. Rural students are also less likely to not only enroll in college, but to actually graduate from college. And there was one rural study that did show that rural students were less confident in their ability to attain a degree than either urban or suburban students. Another predictor of student success that has gotten a lot of popularity lately, which is sort of a non-cognitive, a non-academic predictor, is a concept called grit. And a lot of this research comes from a professor out of University of Pennsylvania, Angela Duckworth. And basically, her definition of grit is sort of a perseverance for long-term goals, or a focused effort and interest over time. And she shows, a lot of her research shows that students who have more grit or are more likely to persevere are more likely to achieve academically as well, and achieve in spite of difficulties. And students with more grit tend to not take failure personally. Instead, they see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. One of the things I have at all the tables, and I thought I'd give you a chance to do, Angela Duckworth has created this 8-item grit test. So if you want to just take a few minutes and you can see how you score on the grit test. It's only 8 questions, and on the back it shows you how to score. Has everyone had a chance to calculate your grit score? I won't ask you to share your grit score, but was anyone really surprised, happy, disappointed? You don't have to share. Well, just to give you, one of the things we did this year at Concord is for all incoming students, we had them fill out an incoming student survey, and these grit questions were part of that survey. So just for comparison, if you're interested, the average grit score for incoming freshmen was about 3.5. So, but don't worry. There was also some, there was a survey done. It was on an online psychology website. They had 1,600 people volunteer to do the grit test, and the adults 25 or older, their scores, the average was about 3.52. So our Concord students are sort of on par with that. The Ivy League undergraduates in the sample, their grit score average was about 3.46. They had West Point cadets, and their grit score was the highest, 3.75. And then they had National Spelling Bee participants, and their grit score was about 3.5, the average. But they found in each of those groups, for example, the students who were most likely to place higher in the National Spelling Bee had higher than average grit scores. The West Point cadets who were most likely to graduate had higher than average grit scores. And there's been tests to predict whether you stay married or not. The higher the grit, the more likely. Whether students drop out of high school. A study of Chicago public schools students found the higher the grit, the more likely they were to graduate from high school, and their average grit score was about 3.89 of Chicago public school children. But the good thing about all of this is there's research now that shows some psychologists think that grit is sort of a fixed personality trait that you really can't grow. But there's a lot of research now out there on these positive academic mindsets, which I'll tell you a little bit about, that show that students can build that grittiness, their likelihood to persevere. They can build their academic self-confidence or self-efficacy. But basically an academic mindset, and this research also started out of Stanford in the 90s with a professor named Carol Dweck. But basically a mindset refers to a student's, their attitudes, beliefs, and dispositions about school and learning that are associated with positive academic outcomes. And so it's really these attitudes and beliefs that often lead students to be engaged in learning or to disengage in learning. So we talked already a little bit about self-efficacy. I'll talk some more about that research. Another type of mindset research is sense of belonging. So students feel like they belong in an academic setting, that they belong on campus. Another type of mindset that has come out of the research is that the work has value, or that it's purposeful learning. And I'll go into a little more depth on all of these. And then the fourth, which has gotten a lot of attention, is growth mindset. And I'll talk some more about that. So basically, the growth mindset, this is Carol Dweck's work from Stanford, is one way to increase self-efficacy and grit and confidence. She basically contends that people have either a fixed or a growth mindset. And those students or individuals with a fixed mindset, basically think you're born with your talent, your intelligence, and abilities. It's fixed, it can't change, it's inherent. And those students with a growth mindset believe that through hard work and effort, you can grow your abilities, you can grow your intelligence. And a lot of the research shows that individuals with a growth mindset, and if you want to go online, there are growth mindset tests you can take too to figure out if you're more fixed or growth mindset. But students with a growth mindset are more likely to embrace challenges. They're less likely to give up when faced with obstacles. Like if they're struggling with a tough math problem, they're more likely to stick with it than someone with a fixed mindset. They accept constructive criticism and feedback as an opportunity to learn, when oftentimes those with a fixed mindset see it as sort of an affront to who they are as a person, and they tend to ignore it, or are offended by it, threatened by it. And those with a growth mindset see success of others as an inspiration and a lesson to learn, while those with a fixed mindset are threatened by the success of others. So the good thing is the research has shown that this is malleable. So if you have a fixed mindset, you can easily move toward a growth mindset. And there are a lot of ways that research has done this. And I'll talk about some of those in a bit. But basically, here are some examples of someone with a fixed mindset. They'll say things like, and I'm sure we hear this a lot, I'm just no good at math. I just can't do math. You're smarter than me. This is too hard. I give up. It's not my fault if I fail. And then some examples of growth mindset quotes, and you've probably heard some of these. Albert Einstein, genius is 1% talent and 99% hard work. There's a video online that talks about even Albert Einstein had to learn how to read once. He had to learn how to add and subtract. And it takes that effort and hard work to move to each step. So there's research out there that shows that students who are taught to have a growth mindset are more likely to earn more credits in a semester, have higher GPAs, and there have been some really simple interventions done to teach this. For example, one such study basically had a control and experimental group. The students in the experimental group read an article about how your intelligence can grow, how your brain can grow with hard work. When you struggle with a problem, your brain grows. They then were asked to write a letter to a younger student to talk about, who was struggling in school, to talk about, through hard work and effort, you can do better in school. The control group read an article just on, I think, brain development or something like that, and just wrote a letter to a seventh grade student, but not with the message about intelligence being not fixed, but you can grow it with hard work. And in that study, they found, here are some of the results from that study, but they found that the students in the growth mindset intervention, as I mentioned earlier, earned more credit hours per semester, were more likely to persist to graduation. And there's a lot of research that's been done lately with just these simple growth mindset messages can make a big impact on student success. So I don't know if you're familiar with Khan Academy, but they have lots of educational videos online, and they have this movement now called You Can Learn Anything, and it's based on the growth mindset. And they've done some studies that show that students who got a message before doing a math problem about hard work mattering did better on the math problems than students who got a message saying just something like, you can do it. So there are lots of examples of that out there these days. So here are some other ways to really reduce stereotype threat and increase self-confidence and grit. It's really critical, though, I think, that the earlier we can intervene with students to teach these kinds of things, the better. Because as one researcher says, that early success begets more success. So, for example, as students develop relationships in school, these become sources of support and learning, and they promote a sense of belonging and academic success. So when students achieve success on something difficult, it improves their belief in their own agency, and it leads to further success. So the sooner we can do these things, really the better. And I'll talk about each of these things a little more. So another way to help reduce stereotype threat is to provide positive role models that really refute these negative stereotypes. So I don't know, does anyone know who this is? Homer Hickam, yes. So West Virginia writer Homer Hickam, who grew up in the southern coal fields and went on to become an astronaut and a best-selling author. I think we all know this is Senator Byrd. These are Concord students graduating. So it's also great to show those role models are likely to have more of an impact on students and their self-efficacy if students really feel like they can relate to their role models as well. And I think it's important that we start talking about the positive things in West Virginia, and not just those negative stereotypes that I mentioned earlier. So one of the other things that comes out of this mindset research is how we praise students, and this goes from little kids to college students. So oftentimes we'll say things like, oh, you're so smart. You did such a good job on that test because you're intelligent, or you have such good ability, or you're so clever. When really we should be saying and praising the process. Things like, I really liked how you struggled with that problem. I'm glad you worked really hard. And there's been a lot of research. There was one study that Carol Dweck did with elementary students. And she put students into two groups, again, a control and experimental group. And both groups were given a really easy test. After the test, one group of students were told, oh, you're so smart. That's why you did so well. The other group were told, oh, you worked so hard on that test. Good job. They then gave those same students the chance to take, said, now, you can take a really hard test and you'll learn and struggle, but you'll learn a lot by taking this hard test, or you can take this easy test. 90-some% of the kids who were in that, in this you worked so hard group chose to take the hard test, when 60-some% of the kids in the you're so smart group opted to take the easy test. Then they took those same kids again, gave them all another easy test. The kids in the you work so hard group did much better on the easy test than the kids in the you're so smart group. So just how we praise, and this has been found in not only little kids, but there was a study with some developmental math students in community colleges who got similar messages, and similar things were found, that those who got this kind of message were more likely to pass the class and did better on the math tests that were given. Another thing that I think we can do, and some research has shown, is that sort of how we frame tests or quizzes. Students who think that a test is of their intellectual ability are more likely to suffer from stereotype threat and do more poorly than students who are told, this really isn't a test of your intellectual ability. It's more of a tool to gauge learning and help you in the learning process. Does that make sense? Okay. So there was an article recently, I mentioned Khan Academy. So the founder of Khan Academy is a guy named Sal Khan. And he recently wrote an article saying, with the title, Why I'll Never Tell My Son He's Smart. And it's basically that message of praise. And he was talking about one night his son, who's only 5 or 6, is learning to read. And he was struggling with the word, I think it was grateful. And the son just struggled and finally got it. And the son turned to his dad and said, aren't you glad I struggled through that until I got it? And Sal's like, this is the message I'm trying to teach my son. It's about only being smart, but that with effort, you can do this. But I wanted to show a quick video of Sal interviewing Carol Dweck. It's only a few minutes.
Years ago, they had about a 15% literacy rate. And I suspect that if you were to talk to someone who could read back then and ask them what percentage of the population you think is capable of reading, they might have said, well, maybe 20%, 25%. Now you fast forward 400 years, we know that that's a wildly pessimistic prediction or assumption, that it's actually 99.99% of the population is capable of reading. Well, what similar blinders do we have on today? So I'm excited to have Carol Dweck here, one of my personal heroes and who's strongly influenced a lot of the work at Khan Academy. Carol, great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, Sal.
So what I'd like to start off with, this word growth mindset, which I believe you came up with. When did you come up with that? What was the motivation and what is it?
A growth mindset is when students believe that their abilities can be developed. A fixed mindset is when they think, I just have a certain amount and that's it.
And this isn't just kind of feel-good talk. This is actually based in science, that the brain actually does grow stronger. Neural connections actually do form when you struggle.
In study after study, we have shown that kids who have a growth mindset get higher grades. It's not a choice between the outcome and the mindset. It shows that if kids engage deeply and effectively in a learning process, the grades and test scores are a natural byproduct. Kids who are praised for their intelligence, our research shows, don't want a challenge afterwards. They don't want to work hard on something, and if they hit difficulty, that's it. We find that when we praise, or parents praise, the process the child engages in, their hard work, but not just hard work, their strategies, their ideas, their focus, their perseverance. Then the student learns these are the ingredients of success. If it gets harder, I'll just do these things. We've already done work with you of inserting growth mindset statements before math problems. And we found together that kids did better.
So one thing that I hope is the folks listening to these videos go out there and tell their parents, tell their children, tell their peers, tell their teachers, tell their students about the growth mindset. Tell them that their brain grows when they get a question wrong, when they struggle, when they look at their errors and they say, hey, that's interesting. You shouldn't be ashamed of your mistake. You should view that as something that's interesting, something to explore. And when you do that, you will actually physically form neural connections. Your brain will actually grow.
So there's a lot on Khan Academy with this new campaign they're doing. There are a lot of neat videos if you're interested in seeing more that sort of focus on the growth mindset. And they've even just gathered YouTube videos, random YouTube videos online that are sort of lessons. Like one, they show a little boy who just learned how to ride his bike, and his dad said, well, what advice would you give other kids who are trying to learn and how to ride a bike? And the kid's like, you can do it. You just have to practice. And if you can't do it, work harder. And so really some great videos. There's one with Yoda and Luke Skywalker and Yoda talking about that same message. So moving on to one of the other academic mindsets, the work has value or purposeful learning. A lot of times I think if you ask students, I know when I ask students in my dissertation, why are you going to college? Most said, I want a good job, I want to make more money, I want a good career. But students also think about wanting to make a difference and having some sort of positive impact on their community and society. And in some of the latest mindset research, they found that when students, their academic work is connected to more of these social or societal making a difference goals, they're more likely to persist through boring academic tasks than those students who are made to think about, oh, I'm doing this because someday I can get a good job and make more money. And I think that's important to think about because a lot of times I know when we're doing outreach to high schools and middle schools, a lot of access programs do this. We talk about the importance of coming to college because it can help you get a good job. And I think there's nothing wrong with talking about that, but I think once students are here, it's important also to link that academic work to those larger social purposes, and it's more likely to motivate students and keep them here.
Sarah?
Yes.
Are there differences among the groups of students who respond to those messages? I mean, the demographics of those students might influence what they think about the social purpose versus the monetary purpose.
Right. You know, I'm not sure about that. That doesn't go into that kind of detail in this particular research, but you know, in some of the other mindset research, the groups like low-income students or African Americans who are more susceptible to stereotype threat, they saw more of an impact on those students with these mindset interventions than white middle class, upper class students. So I would imagine it could be, it might be similar with this, the work has value things too. So the other type of mindset I mentioned earlier is sense of belonging. And this is really about how negative stereotypes can undermine a student's sense of belonging in college. So we really need to make the students feel like that they belong here. And one way to do that, and this is a really simple way, is basically to tell students, you belong here. A lot of students struggle and worry about not belonging to college when they first get here. That's normal. But in time, you come to feel at home. One study did this, and the students who got this message, again, were more likely to persist than students who just were in the control group and did not hear this message. Another thing, and this sort of relates back to the values and reducing stereotype threat, just allowing students to reflect on their personal values helps bring them a sense of identity and belonging as well. I know there was a study with some African American students who just before doing a test were given the opportunity to think about what they valued in life. And for some reason, by doing that, those students did better than students who weren't given that opportunity. And I was actually just talking with Dr. Hawthorne Allen yesterday about some of this work, and she sent me an article that they did that same, they replicated that study with women in physics, college students, and women who were given the chance to think about their personal values, for some reason were more likely to persist in physics than those who didn't have that opportunity. I think in the video, Carol Dweck mentioned this, but in thinking about mindsets, I think it's important to emphasize it's not just effort, although effort is a key piece, but strategies and help from others also make a difference. So for example, a student could study 24/7 for a test, but if they're not studying in the right way, they still may not pass it. So it's important learning strategies, note-taking skills, study skills, those kinds of things need to be coupled with the effort, and also the message that there's a lot of help if students need it as well. I think it's also, many of the researchers point out that it's important not to overpraise too, and overpraise mediocre performance, because then it becomes sort of disingenuous praise. So that's really all I had to share. Are there questions or comments? Yes?
Have you found anything in the research that addresses effective stereotype threat on a person may have a number of different levels of minority status, like an African American female from Appalachia?
You know, I imagine that might be out there, but I'm not familiar with the literature if it is. But there, as I said, there have been hundreds to thousands of studies on stereotype threat now. So I imagine that does exist. And it probably depends on, it could depend on the stereotypes that exist for the individual, depending on the different groups that they're a part of. Because it does matter, sort of, stereotype threat it's very context, it's based sort of on context or situation. So a student might feel very confident about being on the football field, but then in a classroom setting is where stereotype threat might have more of an impact. So it really depends on the situation too. Yes?
I think you mentioned a lot about different races and genders and everything, but what does the information say about Appalachian kids compared to other kids?
That's a great question. So the question was about, I talked about gender and ethnicities and different races and stereotypes. What is said about Appalachian students? That's the thing, and this would be a great research project for a student. There's not been research done on Appalachian students and stereotype threat. I would love to do that someday. I mean, my guess is that you would see that there is some sort of effect, but it has not been done either on Appalachian students or rural students. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, all of it's all geared towards like students and children or
adults. The question was this, I've talked a lot about research with students and maybe young people. There is more research now on adults. I'm trying to think, I don't want to misinform you. And this is young adults, but the University of Texas, Austin, for incoming students, one of the things they've done in the last few years is some students will get in their orientation materials a blurb about UT Austin's mindset, and then others just get information about, oh, campus is nice, you can do this on campus. And they found that the students who, and I consider those adults, 18, 20-year-olds, coming into UT Austin who get that mindset message are doing better academically than those who didn't get the message. And I know there's not been as much on older adults. So that's, I think, an area that could probably have further research too. Other questions, comments? Yes.
Yeah, I would like to know what is actually being done in public schools in West Virginia, with things starting out even in kindergarten, as to how to instill a pride of their Appalachian cultural heritage.
The question was, what are we doing, what's happening in West Virginia schools to teach students about pride for Appalachian heritage at even young age? And I don't know, can any of the students, I know in 8th grade, all West Virginia public schools students have to take a West Virginia history class. Can any students answer, maybe help me answer that?
If anything, I think that the history class is detrimental to helping get rid of the stereotype.
Really?
Because we're putting ourselves in it, and it's not looked at like a positive thing.
I don't know if it's so much a compliment or if it's the teachers teaching the content or they're buying into the stereotypes of the teach.
So stereotypes.
Okay. Were people able to hear that in the back? Basically said that sometimes they feel like the stereotypes in that 8th grade history class are almost represented in what you're learning, and you're not sure if that's the teacher or the content. Yeah.
I know, and when I was in school, there like, the only thing you hear about West Virginia is like, we're all, like, we smoke, we die early, we're overweight, you know, like, so, I mean, I don't think, I mean, we do have that one West Virginia class, but okay, so that's 1 out of 12 years that we kind of talk about some issues of West Virginia.
Right.
But there's no pride in it, it's just memorization of facts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we studied the county and the fact that we read October 5.
Sometimes we study the stuff that she talked about, because whenever you do history, you usually look at the current and compare it to the past.
Mhm.
So we talk about all of the negative things, but 8th graders aren't going to know how to fix that. So it's just kind of detrimental to us. Like, oh, we're going to grow up and be fat and smokers and we're going to die.
Mhm.
And it's just awful to think about when you're an 8th grader.
That is depressing to think about.
No matter what age you are. But
Right.
still.
And I mean, there are some realities beneath some of those stereotypes. I mean, when you do look at the data, I mean, we do tend to, unfortunately, like are one of the most obese states, have the highest number of smokers. So there are some realities there too. But how can we still encourage students to think positively about our culture at the same time and not let it affect your confidence as a student? Did you have another?
I was just going to say, it's so unfortunate that there are so many negative stereotypes about the area, because if someone asks me about, what do you think about West Virginia or Appalachia? The first things that come to my mind are love of family, love of place, and collectivism. We're a collectivist culture that believes in collective agency. We help each other in times of need and hardship, and other people as well. During Hurricane Katrina, I'll never forget, a news clip that I saw where there was a parking lot in Walmart with rows upon rows upon rows of clothing and food and toiletries and all those things that people could come and get what they needed. The announcer said, these things came from Harlem, Kentucky, which people think of as one of the poor areas of the nation.
Right.
But it's one of the most generous areas of the nation, too. And some people just don't get that.
Yeah, and I think those are the things we have to be proud of and talk about more too.
So what is then actually being done at the local community level and at the state level to address this problem?
You know, I don't know if much has been done yet, honestly. With any, like if you go to Angela Duckworth's website, she has now a disclaimer because there are a lot of now for-profit companies that are really trying to make money off of this mindset, research and grit, and provide schools with materials and training and that you have to pay for. But I think it can be done really easily. It's we're doing some things at Concord in our University 100 now. We're doing a similar mindset intervention that I talked about earlier, where students learn about how your brain can grow, you can get more intelligent through hard work, and then writing a letter to a younger sibling or relative about it. But I honestly don't know at the state level if this is being talked about a lot. I know the Gear Up program in West Virginia, that they have reapplied for that federal grant. I've talked with their director about this, and he's talked about incorporating that growth mindset message with some of the outreach they do. They start with 7th graders and are going to work through freshman year of college. He also talked about providing that message to parents, not just the students, but the parents of those Gear Up students. And those are, the Gear Up schools are in the high poverty counties in West Virginia. So I guess a little bit is being done, but I think we could do a lot more. And I think part of it is just getting the word out there about this type of research.
And if I may add, perhaps through the eyes of non-West Virginians, because if anybody has seen the fantastic documentary by Ken Burns, the 2 hours documentary on Appalachian, you will say, wow, this is just fantastic. And what can be all learned from history and how can we move forward?
Right.
And have a dialogue and have students say, well, what is the identity? How do I, just like you say, you identify West Virginia, what does that actually mean? Because if you don't mind telling me, in Belgium we do that from first grade on. What does it mean to be a Belgian citizen and how will you contribute? Then fast forward to the middle school, we were asked to write an essay on how do we view the European Union and what is the role of Belgium within the European Union. So the same could be done here of West Virginia, you know, that itself would be instill a pride at all ages. That's what I think.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
I know there's a couple faculty. I know there's a couple faculty here from the education department, but have you shared the information more with them, Donna?
You know, I have done a couple presentations in the state at some state conferences. One was the West Virginia Student Success Summit, and I did a very similar presentation, and there were higher ed and K-12 educators there, and quite a bit of interest from K-12 teachers. Now, who knows what they'll do with it when they get back to their schools, I'm not sure. And also, I have presented at the state's, there's a state student affairs organization, and I presented at that conference too. So hopefully other higher ed folks will do things at other campuses too. But.
Is there more that we can do besides University 100, and what kind of suggestions might you have?
I
don't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, not at all. I think it's really easy, some of those simple messages that we can just sort of blast all over campus about hard work and effort making the difference. The Khan Academy website has some actually great or I don't know if they're flyers, but some of those messages that we could tailor or use. I think one of the things, I know we've applied for a grant, and if we get this federal grant, a lot of these interventions are pretty low cost, but I think providing more professional development around these for faculty and staff, so we can incorporate more of it into the classroom, and our work with students outside of the classroom too would be great. I'll think more about that too and come up with more ideas, definitely. Yes.
I was just sitting here thinking, you know, how simple it would be to just like write a message, you know, like put it up on when the students walk into the classroom. Just at the beginning of class, to put up a message that's, you know, like a mindful message or a growth mindset message.
Yep.
And that just might change, you know, some of the learning or the outcome, or how I present a task, or you know, things like that. I think a good idea too would be to incorporate some things in the Upward Bound program, because to me that would be an excellent place to include some of this with those students.
And the earlier the better. Yep. Yeah. I know in my section of University 100 on Monday, I had the students they each talked about a moment they were proud of, and also a moment where they overcame, or in a time when they overcame a challenge. And we talked about how they can use those moments when they're struggling in the classroom or having issues outside the classroom at college, and think about what got them through those other struggles or obstacles. So I think doing some more of that kind of thinking with students could be helpful too, so they know that they could adapt what they learned from those situations to a lot of different situations. Yeah.
Sarah, I was going to say, one of the Khan Academy videos that they have actually visual images of what it looks like for the brain when you struggle and the growth that happens. And just having an image like that, I think a lot of times might even be more effective for students or any of us than the words too. Just, it's really interesting.
It is. It is. Yeah.
I'd say students always have to eat. So, people, faculty, everything. So, like, why not put some message up around where these high traffic areas are, like the cafeteria, or even, I know they put statistics and things in the restrooms sometimes.
And everyone has to do that too. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. Did you have another?
Yeah, I was thinking, since you mentioned, I don't know what the policy is about putting pictures or photographs of the Appalachian in the classrooms or at least in the public places, so that it's also you come in, you see this beautiful, I have it in my home on the Appalachian beautiful mountains in the spring and in the fall. You know, why not have it here? To
Around
say,
campus.
Wow, this is mine. You identify this is my place or this is my county. And even have maybe the art students, whether they are art major or others. There is the regional painter Robert Duckwiller, right, who is a graduate from this university. Yeah. And there are reproductions out, there are prints out. Maybe they could have their own shop. The students of Concord University students could put on an art show on the Appalachian, how they view their own community.
That's a good idea. Just positive images of Appalachia around campus.
Positive images through the print, through the artwork.
And I think another idea too is like with University 100, we have upper class mentors, and I think doing more of that sort of formalized mentoring program, upperclassmen with underclassmen, might be an effective way to.
I like the idea. We've been trying to do this for a while in business, and that is to show successful graduates. You know, have a wall of, you know, of pride for the people who have left and what they've done. And I think that, you know, when all of you leave here, you'll be successful. And in the things that you do, we want to keep up with you. It's hard to follow you, it's hard to track you, but we'd like to know where you're going so that we can spotlight what you've done, because those people who are here next are looking for inspiration, and they're looking to know, I can do that, they did that, you know. And so I think tying those things together can be helpful also.
Like I know the convocation speaker this year, the whole time I'm like, oh, this is great. She's a young role model that students really can relate to because she went to Concord and is doing well, worked hard through Concord. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you all. Thanks all for coming. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, there's my email and office number. And please take cookies and brownies with you.